And I will introduce our next speaker. Our second paper today is being presented by Markus Kutschka. Markus pursued his bachelor's thesis in Egyptology and Coptology with a research emphasis on applying statistical inference to historical Nile heights. Prior to this, he obtained a bachelor's degree in statistics from the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Munich. His academic focus revolves around the utilization of statistical analytical models within the field of Egyptology. In addition to his academic pursuits, Markus has been an active member of the metal music scene for about 2 decades, and he's been involved in music performance for 10 years. He initially started with 80s hard rock, but has since evolved his musical interest towards more extreme metal genres. Furthermore, he has been engaged in exploring the incorporation of Egyptian themes in primarily black and death metal. In conjunction with this, he aspires to employ statistical text mining techniques to analyze the lyrics within these musical genres, and we'll see these interests come to bear today in his paper, Ancient Egypt and Extreme Metal. Welcome, Markus, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction and also for the invitation. It's my first conference at all, so bear with me. I will keep the M's short and hopefully I can explain everything as I like to explain it. Yes, as I told, my topic is extreme metal in ancient Egypt. Can you see my paper? Yes, good.
Yep, you are all set.
Okay. You can all read what I talk about in this paper I wrote for the journal of the Egyptian Museum here in Munich. You get the presentation in the Google Drive, so you can click the link and download it yourself. It is only in German, but Google Translate is your friend, so it wouldn't be a problem. What I will talk about is I will give a creation of a basic collection on what is out there on Egyptian themes and mostly black and death metal bands. I said this restriction because I've observed that ancient Egypt as a whole concept is mainly a frequent central theme in those kind of genres. So I don't primarily look at bands who make just a song or a concept album. I will look at the bands who has an overall concept with ancient Egypt, and also who use physical copies, because you have like ancient Egypt imagery on the cover and in the booklets and so on, and the lyrics, of course. I will not talk about Nile because it was already a topic on the last version of this conference and also in other papers. So what is my source of information? Of course, the Encyclopedia Metallum and also self-statements from bands, which I talked via email. In this paper, I will create a basic collection, and I also want to demonstrate a thematic diversity in typical motifs I find within the songs. My approach is to look at the reception in the music, then the reception in the artwork, and then the reception in the lyrics. Coming to some examples from bands from Egypt itself, like the most famous one we mostly know are like Crescent. I have the t-shirt on, of course. The next one I want to mention is Lycopolis. Lycopolis is like a raw black metal band from Asyut, like a one-man project. And this is very interesting because who does this, he combines the modern Egypt with the ancient Egypt, mostly in the booklets and lyric-wise. Then I want to mention Osiris and Scarab because I focus on them in the coming minutes. Also, since I'm from Germany, I need to mention German bands. Here, the bold ones I will focus on, and these are Apep, Maes, and Mart. Here you find also Shuyet. Shuyet is interesting because the members use pseudonyms as names, and they use their typical ancient Egyptian, we call it word names or sentence names, like Neferseteh, which means Set is beautiful, or Tazert, which is a mistranslation from old Bacchus, a Book of the Dead translation, and actually means Ta Jezeret, which means Holy Land. So you can there a little bit see where they get the information from. So starting with the reception part, I will talk about reception in music first. As I listen to every song I have in my list, I find there is, in general, no Oriental sounding elements, like cliche sounding elements. There are exceptions, of course, like the famous one Nile, with the use of the so-called Phrygian dominant scale or Oriental scale. Apep is the German band I mentioned before. They used Nile as an inspiration, so they use it also very heavily. And Crescent is also on this list because, especially on the new album, they used Arabic instruments, but unfortunately no ancient instruments. And we know some ancient instruments from Egypt, but unfortunately they don't use it. So what I rely on is the textual and visual presentation. And I want to mention that in my imagination, if you don't have the text and the visual representation, this song could be any black metal or death metal band at all. So I really want to stress that they get their role models for the bands they look at, and they get their music from are like established bands from mainly Western worlds like USA or Europe, and not like cliche Oriental bands with what we think about it, about what we would cliche type like listen to as Oriental. So coming to the next point, reception in artwork. You find reception in the logo and on the booklet and in the covers. I have here some logos, like from Crescent, like Blade of Horrors, like Mars, like Osiris and Apep. And what is in common, they have mostly the Ankh sign and the Udjat eye. They have a combination of both. And also somehow a snake, or they have not at all a Egyptian logo or some motifs, like a normal type of lettering. The next one is on the cover and in the booklets. The repetitive motifs are like they depict gods or kings. They have monuments on it, like temples, like obelisks, like pyramids, of course, also in fragments, like a stele or something. And also very common are reliefs with hieroglyphs. I show some examples from booklets. Like first one is Crescent carving the fires of Ankh. It's a very basic booklet, so no fancy pictures or images, but they write their own hieroglyphic texts, which you can see in the columns left from the English text. And interesting there is in the left columns under the fires of Ankh, in the first column, they wanted to write the title of the song, and they also sing it or recitate it in somehow. But in the text, they write Nech Achet Zechet, which means not the fires of Ankh, but Ankh, the fires. So that's interesting. And secondly, they wrote Zechet, which means fire, 2 times. And in my interpretation, they just looked at the dictionary and copied the whole line. But those are 2 different writings for one word, maybe from different times, from different text corpus. And that's interesting that they just copied the whole line, and maybe to look that it looks more, or I don't know. But it's interesting, and they didn't give me an explanation for it, but I find it interesting. The next one is from Mars Reincarnation. This is an example for use of like monumental architecture and some other things, like they use also live, they use customs like mummy bindings, of course. And the drummer here left uses a Anubis mask. They also use pseudonyms like god names, with also other bands do, like Anubis and Osiris. And they stand here photoshopped before the fortified gate in Medinet Habu in Thebes West. This is another example for the reliefs and for the hieroglyphic text, mostly from Greek and Roman times or Roman temples, which you all see when you do a night cruise and you see only Greek and Roman temples. So this is maybe where their inspiration came from. This is Mars Monuments Will Enslave. This is also a German band. Here you have the ceiling painting of Dendera. This is a nice example from later forest obliteration, which is just a mummified pharaoh with some like very big snakes, ray snakes with sun discs, and it looks very badass, but nothing too fancy to see here. This is a relatively new example I found. It's from Obsidian, Litany of Aya. They also use like the monumental pyramids and sun and also like temples, but I don't find them look too Egyptian. And they also translated their English song titles to relative good Egyptian. And I find that interesting that they really get into this, how to translate English to Egyptian and other ways around. Last one example is from Scarab Serpents of the Nile. Here you see a human-fied beetle with a sun disk, with a very common theme in ancient Egypt imagery. And also you see on its chest there stands Udjat, which means he lives foreverly, which is a very common Egyptian phrase. Coming to the main point of this talk, the reception and lyrics. I thought about 6 main topics I found, which were repeated, and the bands have not only one theme, but they mixture it. They have some main themes which they rely on heavily, but it's like more a mixture of all. I found that bands used historical events, like a song about Ramesses III versus the Sea People, or the architect Imhotep, which is a scientist under King Djoser, and also science in general relies on this song. Secondly, ideas of gods, like the god Mard, like the god Montu and Osiris. And what's interesting about the last 2 songs is that the band Crescent used ancient Egyptian epithets within their song, within their lyrics, like Neb Wazet, which means Lord of Thebes, or Neb Nehech, which means Lord of Eternity. So they looked which epithets has Montu, which epithets has Osiris, and they used it within their lyrics. There's also a song and many songs, this is just an example, about gods of the underworld, like Osiris, Ra, or Anubis. Mard wrote also 2 songs about ideas of kingship, like a very common theme in ancient Egypt texts, that the king is established by the gods. And also that, of course, kings, when they die, they live eternally and get so immortalization. The next one, which is the greatest part of topics, like, of course, mythological stories. There are different myths which have their songs, like the Osiris myth, which is a very common topic also in like single songs from other bands who don't use ancient Egypt as a common theme. And interesting wise, German band Mard likes to do relatively basic Egyptological famous myth, like the divine slaughtering of mankind, which you have in every introduction lecture in university. You learn this myth. So they looked at the literature. Next one, of course, creation myth, like the cosmogony of Heliopolis. Heliopolis, I mentioned before, they made a whole concept album about funerary texts like the Amduat, which is a travel from the sun god Ra, who travels through the underworld. And when the sun goes down in the west and rises again in the east, so every hour he has to do different tasks. And Lycopolis did a whole album with 12 songs on it. Present and Apep and Scarab did different songs of like Judgment of the Dead or Book of the Dead. And Apep, of course, did dedicated a whole song to spell Book of the Dead 7, which is very interesting wise. And they also adapt 2 lines of it within their lyrics, only in Egyptological transliteration, but that's nice. Here are three last topics which I want to mention briefly, because this is more or less like unique features. They have a fiction. Mars wrote an entire album about an undead magician who wants to reconquer Egypt through black magic. Scarab mainly criticized somehow the Egyptian regime and the state, but before the revolution of 2013, which is also interesting because afterwards they didn't do songs like this. And also I found a singular example of a reception, like Apep did a song about a pyramid city on a desert planet on the tabletop franchise Warhammer 40k. I asked Mars, and I think it's transferable to other bands, where they get the information from. They get the information indeed from Egyptological literature, like the book you see here. They find it from popular scientific literature, from documentaries, from esoteric literature. They mentioned the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. And other bands also use conspiracy theories, like from Erich Däniken. As a special case, I want to mention here the Christian Bible for like songs separating the seas from Augustine's Red, for example. So you find ancient Egypt in there, of course. I made a little like word cloud and a text mining analysis with R from 282 songs from 21 bands. And the most frequent words are words like God, life, soul, death, blood, light, earth, fire, and Ra. So those words are somehow comparable to like ancient Egyptian themes, but when you look at I want to compare it to normal metal lyrics, mainly of course, from death and black metal. And I think this is just like normal words you find in every song there. But besides like words like Nile or the god names, this is somehow interesting. Here a list of further bands you can look and hear at. This you can look at my presentation. I have just 3 minutes left. This I will keep short. So as I read a book about staging of exhibitions in Egyptian museums from Annika Kolster-Sommer, I found in theory that it is very comparable to reception and the use of ancient Egypt, especially in music and in metal music, because the purpose and aim of the staging is to make the abstract accessible. So through the text, the musical, and the visuals, some ancient Egypt will somehow be accessible to us. The next one is that the characteristic of staging is that it takes in a certain time and 3 dimensions in a specific place. This is somehow comparable, but when you listen to a CD, you reproduce it every time and every second and somehow. So when you go to a concert, it's somehow reproducible. It's somehow in a certain place and a specific time. The effect of staging, and this is the point I will focus on, is because effect of staging is that the exhibitions refer to what has been experienced in the past, and as well to valid cultural codes that the viewer has internalized without having to be aware of them. So I found that there are 2 dimensions within metal bands when you go back to the metal bands. The first dimension is the metal dimension. So the music is inspired by already established bands from like Western worlds, also the ones from Egypt itself. The next dimension is that where they have the Egypt dimension from, and that's from literature, from science, of course, from associations, from what they think about Egypt. And so this is somehow like the staging of the metal, how metal bands look at ancient Egypt is like they stage an exhibition in museums. And that's of course true because they go to Egyptian museums, but also internalized without knowing it. Some short words about the metal scene in Egypt itself, because I don't think too many know about it. The scene is comparably small. There are only a few opportunities to buy merchandise in real life, only at the concerts, of course, maybe through internet, it's now better. There are interesting wise, there's a similar development to Europe as in unity of fans, because the fans get somehow get a certain standard, and they get dissatisfied with what's happened, and they argue about the bands like we do it also, and that's kind of interesting. Acceptance in society is also a point I thought about, and it's somehow ambivalent. Music in general is rather seen critical, but some are marked with devil worshippers. The other likes to combine it with their faith and all. So here are some flyers, and they look very good. Then I come to end. I come to the conclusion that the reception lies mostly in the imaginary and the lyrics, and I found that they have a very wide thematic focus with 6 main topics. And I think also, and I rely on it, that they use current research. More current, yeah, you know. Outlook, I will do a more detailed text analysis, and I will, of course, enlarge collections of the sources, because there are many more bands coming, and I will do more focus studies. For example, the Osiris myth from different bands, or how they look at. If you scan the QR code, you find a more playlists, a more detailed playlist on what bands out there from all I mentioned and some songs. Yes, that was it.